Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And here's one that you guys have all been requesting. The new album from Lupe Fiasco, Tetsuo and Youth. To say that I've got a complicated opinion on Lupe Fiasco would probably be understating him. See, unlike most people, I didn't get into him from his first Food and Liquor album or from The Cool. Nope, the very first project I heard from Lupe Fiasco was Lasers. And sure, it's definitely poppy and it hasn't aged well at all, and it definitely feels overly simplified in comparison with those earlier albums, but I'm gonna stand by the controversial opinion that for what Lasers is, a pop-flavored rap record designed for the radio with only the slightest hint of controversy in its politics that frequently went too broad, it kinda works, and I sure as hell find it an easier listen than the preachy, overwrought, and yet incredibly underwhelming Food and Liquor 2, The Great American Rap Album Part 1. But yeah, putting all that aside and going back to revisit Lupe Fiasco's career, I found him to be an artist that I like but don't quite love. Now don't get me wrong, as a lyricist he's very frequently strong, and his production is always at least interesting even if it doesn't always work for him, but when it comes to his content, well, okay, do you know that guy in college who's definitely smart and can grasp certain topics very well, but never really takes that next step to go deeper into something that's really poignant and special, or chooses to go for broad appeal that might be popular in the moment until the second somebody calls him on it? Yeah, Lupe Fiasco tends to fall into that category for me. A rapper who can frequently get damn close to something almost transcendent and even occasionally making it, but more often than not, he doesn't take that extra step. Or even worse, he gets embroiled in conspiracy theory bullshit or broad controversial statements that make him look so much less intelligent or insightful than he actually is. Which is a shame, because when he actually stays away from that crap and goes deeper, he can make fantastic music unlike anybody else. And it's almost like Kick Push that proves it. It circles back to my hard rules about art and politics, which really can be applied to any art looking to push a message. Good framing, populism, and nuance. And while Lupe Fiasco tends to absolutely nail the first, he can stumble on the second and kinda trip up on the last part. And what this tends to mean is that his records, while maintaining a thematic through line that I can definitely respect, they often feel inconsistent for me. The amazing highs only highlighting some of the really painful lows. So I'll admit, I was very skeptical about his upcoming album, Tetsuo and Youth. Not only had it been delayed a worrying number of times and almost canceled, I was not impressed at all with the majority of Lupe Fiasco's output that he'd been dropping throughout 2014. And sure, I heard he was going back to his roots with this record and that it was gonna be his best work since The Cool. Of course he was gonna say that. And believe me, I wanted to get hyped up for a new Lupe Fiasco album again. But I'll be honest, I had extremely low expectations going into this album. But what did we get? Well, as I expected, we got at least an interesting record. And you know what? I'm pleased to be able to reflect what nearly every other critic has said about Tetsuo and Youth. Yes, it's a return to form for Lupe Fiasco, and it's easily the best project he's delivered in a long ass time. Now there's still issues and problems with it, some of which I've always had with Lupe Fiasco, and some that are newer, but they're easier to overlook in favor of the stronger moments on this album because there are some great ones. And I'll say it, having re-listened through Lupe Fiasco's entire discography, Tetsuo and Youth as a whole is probably close to being on par with The Cool. Yeah, I said it. Not quite reaching the same highs as that record did, but ultimately being a more thematically consistent album as a whole. So yeah, let's start with Lupe Fiasco himself. And here I'm happy to report that he actually does present more layers of nuance in his technical lyricism, his personality, and his content on this album. Partially because there's just more of it. This album is Lupe Fiasco's longest record to date, and it sure as hell feels long, with tracks frequently spilling over the 5-minute mark, and the second track, Mural, nearly hitting 9 minutes, with no chorus or verse structure. It just seems like it goes on forever. Now this is both good and bad. On the one hand, the sheer display of technique and hard bars and the scope of the poetry, it's excellent. But on the other hand, the long-winded nature of the rhymes can not only mean that each song is going to take its sweet time getting to the point, but simply based on the law of averages, you're going to simply get more corny or ridiculous or whack lines or forced rhymes, even on the good songs, because there's more of them. It doesn't help matters that Lupe Fiasco seems defiantly aware that his material runs long, and he's not going to make his bars easy to really decipher. And I'm okay with that, but it also means that his music focuses more on creating complicated, intricate moods, rather than a crystallized, nuanced, direct message. Now, That's not bad precisely, but it's very different for him. And while I would make the argument that it can make some of his message lose some of that overall populism and overall appeal, the increased nuance is definitely appreciated. And it's not like we're dealing with a Shabazz Palaces here. If you put in the time, Lupe's bars can easily be understood and deciphered. We're not that difficult. Now granted, it helps that his instrumentation and production is more on point as well. Yeah, there are instrumental flourishes that seem peripheral or gratuitous. The season interludes don't really seem to play a purpose beyond some cool strings production, at least at first. And the banjo intro and outro and dots and lines doesn't really serve a purpose outside of just being, well, awesome. And while Lupe Fiasco's infatuation with rock-inspired beats that aren't always a great fit for his voice, it hasn't gone away. He's tempered more of those impulses with significantly stronger melodies that can be catchy enough for pop radio and yet complex enough to show some real artistry behind them. Putting aside the interludes, the gorgeous faded piano and vocal sample on Mural, the organ and noisy percussion on Blur My Hands with a pretty solid hook from Guy Sebastian, the ragged harmonica and strains get some strikingly crisp cymbals on Dots and Lines, the muted horns, prominent bass line, and echoing snares on Little Death, the oily synth menacing synth wobble, and a trap-inspired production on Chopper, the hollow bass, echoing snap and thin keys on Deliver, that leads probably to one of the best choruses on the album thanks to that scratchy film and Ty Dolla $ign's heavily lowered vocals. There's a lot to really love about this album instrumentally. Now there are some points where things don't quite work. The Kanye-inspired chunky auto-tune plinky synths and choppy samples on Madonna and Other Mothers in the Hood didn't quite coalesce for me, even despite some really great lyrics. The xylophone and oily hollowness of Adoration of the Magi could use a little bit more of the horns on the song, and whenever Lupe Fiasco brought Troy in for the hooks, I'm sorry, his voice was so thin and weedy that it completely pulled me out of the songs every time he was featured, because it was a shame he was on the song They Resurrect over New with Ab-Soul, and Ab-Soul actually dropped a pretty damn good verse. I really wish I could have enjoyed that track a lot more. Now the other artist that Lupe primarily featured on the hooks was Nicki Jean, and she was fine enough, but outside of Madonna and Other Mothers in the Hood, I don't quite think she added enough to the songs to really distinguish themselves or make her more of a unique personality, which did kind of bug me. But the song that easily stood out the most, easily the best on the album instrumentally, with the razor-tight strings line and the subtle pianos, the guitar snarl lurking in the background, and multiple moments of intense crescendo, to say nothing of the key change. And that's before we get to the second half of the track, which after rattles of chains and a spoken word interlude, transitions into these grimy synths that echo that strings melody, a great textured drum line, and Lupe sounding more ferocious than he has ever had. The song is Prisoner 1 and 2, and it's easily one of the best songs Lupe Fiasco has ever made, diving into graphic detail of prison culture, from fights to hunger strikes to rape to death row, to even insight into the mind of a prison guard to show the other side of the image. It's a sort of sharply conscious political song that when Lupe Fiasco is on point, he delivers like nobody else. This takes us to the actual lyrical contents of the album, and when you prune away much of the off-topic lyrical flights of fantasy, there's a lot to really like. The sprawling Mural is just one of many of Lupe Fiasco's oft-repeated shots at modern hip-hop, but instead of engaging in hyperbole or overly broad condemnations, he brings back his self-deprecating sense of humor and wit that's always enjoyable. In Dots and Lines, it fits into a very similar mode, loaded to the brim with references to math that not only shows that Lupe Fiasco knows what he's talking about, welcome change, but also reflects a drive to cut to a pure brand of hip-hop that's intellectual, and it's beyond the radio-friendly anthems that his label wanted him to make. It's also a song that begins to crystallize many of the running metaphors throughout this album. Circles and cycles, a sense of renewal and breaking free of situations that will never evolve or change or get better, and appropriating typical Christian iconography to show it a new birth. It places the season's instrumental interludes in very sharp context. There's a well-defined arc to this album, the enlightenment sought in the summer facing the institutional bulwarks against it in the fall that seem insurmountable in the bleakness of the winter. It's one of the reasons that the final interlude, Spring, features no songs after it. It's a new beginning for Lupe, infinite possibilities, a moment of freedom away from the major label now, and now every single path is open to him. Now let me stress, I really like this thematic progression, and to his credit, Lupe does a lot to interweave songs that wouldn't otherwise seem to fit into this arc. Little Death goes for something small, the moments where the larger picture might seem better except for the little problems that are symptomatic of a larger cancer underneath. And No Scratches takes a breakup song and plays it with with a sad bitterness that when just not gonna work out in these sort of relationships that just flame out. And the desolation of the winter segment on this album is pretty stark. Chopper is a flat-out gangsta posse cut. It shows more of Lupe's guilt that despite the real depth that his more ignorant material reflected, it might have been honest, it was a material with more mainstream appeal, and that's kind of sick on some level. And Deliver goes even deeper, showing how the barest of conveniences can be stripped away in the most bleak of ghettos, how they can't even get pizza delivery, something that we could all cope for. Hell, Adoration of the Magi is a message both for himself and other great rappers to pull back and find some perspective, rise above the vulgarity, and aim for something that will earn adoration of the masses and the intelligent alike, because that's ultimately what matters. And I do love how much he treats so much of this album like a video game, a constant challenge that can feel like a slog through level after level, but steps that he must take, and he must be driven to do it on his own if he wants to create art and build a legacy that he's proud, be the hero he wants to be. And then you realize what the majority of this album is. A metaphor for Lupe Fiasco's constant struggle with his record label Atlantic and his own second-guessing nature. On the one hand, it definitely fits together, and it works, and Lupe Fiasco incorporates enough details to make it interesting, but on the other hand, it also kind of undercuts some of the more visceral stories that he tells when you realize the stories discuss very real issues that are relevant to a lot of people, and yet Lupe Fiasco is using them as the main text for deeper issues that he has with Atlantic in his career. It's a sort of hyperbolic presentation that's toned down, but has consistently bugged me about Lupe Fiasco. And to be fair, I think he knows this, and I'm not saying that he doesn't care about these issues in plain text, he clearly does. But it does mean that for as good as the concept of this album is, I get the feeling that songs like Prisoner 1 and 2 and Deliver might work a little bit better outside of that overarching theme, especially when the storytelling on the songs is so lurid and vivid and probably very real for a lot of people. But yeah, putting all that aside, Tetsuo and Youth by Lupe Fiasco is a damn good album that finally shows him on point. And as I said, it's nearly on par with The Cool, and it certainly comes together better as a whole than that album did. For me, this record as an 8 out of 10 and definitely a recommendation. It's nice to see one of the more conscious and imaginative MCs out of Chicago return to the spotlight. And while Tetsuo and Youth is overlong, meandering, and occasionally a little bit corny and melodramatic, it features some of the best work of Lupe's career. I'm definitely glad to see him back and finally free of his record label obligations to pursue whatever his heart desires. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. If there's any other albums coming out that you want me to take a look at, or there's anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm more than happy to give them a listen. But right now, this week is looking really good. We got Joey Badass, Sleater Kinney, Doomtree. Holy crap, that is actually pretty damn awesome. So I'm psyched for the rest of the week. Until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.